What's up? Welcome to a new episode of Movie Schmovie. This is episode number 396. My name is Steve, one of the
Whoa.
co-hosts. Yeah, that was not me. That was my other one of the other co-hosts. That was
Joey Lawrence.
Joey Lawrence was joining us on the pod today. We're
Whoa.
having a flashback 90s Blossom tribute episode. Yeah. So again, I'm Steve. I'm one of the co-hosts, and as always, I'm joined by
Right.
And me, John. And I feel like I know this is going to sound crazy, but I feel like I've seen you guys in a dream before.
Yeah. I feel like I've seen you before.
but haven't been here before, but it feels so,
I've never been on this podcast before, but
Right.
I feel like I've seen you guys in a dream.
Hold on. And I feel like that microphone and that Christmas tree in the background
Oh my God.
and that doll up on there. I feel like
It's all coming back to you, huh? Because that's what's happening to me.
Coming back to me now. So we'll get to that in a moment. That was John. He's going to get into his pick this week for required viewing, which was it 1945?
1945.
Yeah, Dead of Night.
Dead of Night.
We're going to also talk a little bit later on about the new Toho released Godzilla Minus One, which is in theaters now here in the States. And yeah, I guess some other bits and bobs, if you will, after that. But let's go right into it. John, remind us about Dead of Night, why you chose it, and let's jump into that.
I mean, I kind of found out it was an Ealing film after I started digging into it based on a recommendation. Someone I know who's a very big film buff and often is the person to turn me on to, especially older films, mentioned it in a Facebook group that's kind of devoted to horror, and that kind of stuck in my brain. And then when I finally looked it up and I saw that it was this, one of those films from that time that was reasonably well regarded for its time, and also retrospectively, it's one of the movies that people point back to saying this one kind of holds up in a way. And it reminded me of the way the other Ealing film we watched, which was from years later, but The Lady Killers was another movie that had sort of seemed to have some kind of contemporary value, or at least point to contemporary ideas about genre and storytelling that not so much that are like groundbreaking, but that are a little bit cool to see in an older movie like that, to kind of remind yourself. It's like picking up that classic book and reading it and realizing it's really good and going, oh, okay, that's right. People, it wasn't like in the last 20 years that people invented like smart storytelling or good camera work and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know. I think that it was an appealing prospect to see what it looked like for Ealing to make a horror film and to make something even earlier. And I also think just sometimes on the show, it is fun to go out of that usual spectrum of sort of films released in our lifetimes that we tend to talk about. Even though I think we're all reasonably curious about all movies, we don't really talk about the older ones much. So it seemed like a good shot. And then when I realized it had been a year since we talked about The Lady Killers, it made me think, oh, maybe the Christmas tradition, the December tradition will be to pick an Ealing film. But I don't know. I have a lot to say about just the sort of the construction of this and just the kind of anthology tradition that it's part of. But before we get into that, I don't know, I'd like to know what did you guys think of Dead of Night? And did you have a similar sort of feeling that it felt like at times the camera work, the acting style, it was a little bit more contemporary than, this definitely still feels like an old movie, but there were moments where it just, it felt fresh to me. Did you feel the same way, Ronald?
Yeah. I think one of the things that's very apparent when it first starts is like this is it's kind of a master class in storytelling. I mean, my issue with this and Lady Killers is these scripts have such a great premises, and then at some point he gets a little like, let's go off the rails and start making people act zany. But the scene where the gentleman comes into the room and describes his feeling of not knowing what's going on is so good that it, like, you realize the more I watch old stuff. I mean, this is a very obvious thing. What I'm going to say is, like, the more I realize that Tarantino is just mimicking this stuff. Like, he's just trying to make you feel the way that these movies made him feel, where it's like it is a masterclass. It's like this very sharp storytelling that's happening in these large casts where things are kind of being thrown around between the characters. This dynamic where pieces are coming out between characters and jumps in story, and then the ending gave me this insane dread that I have had only a couple times in my life. Once in real life off of an edible, because like when you feel like you're in something that you can't control, that's like a odd
Ronald, this was made in the 40s by British people, so it was really strong tea that they were
yes,
they were
and the
in.
scone, it was like the combination of a
they dipped it too many times.
Well, or scones that are like a day off, and then like some really strong tea, and then
just really like non-heated stiff scones combined with some.
Ronald, that ending you're talking about is, I think what's interesting about it is you sort of see it coming, and then when it starts to happen, it feels satisfying, and then it keeps going under the credits. The way that it keeps going, I felt like that was the stylistic thing that felt like bold for its time. But even now, that would feel bold if a movie like that just kept like doing what it was doing, but under the credits but you could totally hang out there and keep watching it and going like, it's kind of like making you think about the guy's behavior at the beginning of the movie. And how he's acting kind of strange. And I think what you're getting at, Ronald, about the sort of sophistication of the storytelling is dead on, because, this movie lets us hang out in the mystery of why he's acting so strange. Because even before he starts recognizing people from his dream, he's acting a little strange. And I like that the movie lets us wait until really the very end before we fully understand like the sort of, the sort of existential loop that he's caught in.
I've only seen an ending like that one time. And that's the thing. Where like whatever you're watching just extends to the credits, and then you're like, oh no, this is just going to leave me with like, oh man, this is resolved. It's like, oh no, this is going on. This is going to continue and stay in my brain after it leaves. In the story.
It also made me think of like the Black Mirror Christmas episode or something like that, where there's a sort of like there's a torment. It seems like a character might be trapped in that you don't quite understand why. Steve, you haven't had a chance to say anything. What do you think of Dead of Night?
I having not known anything about it, I was really pleasantly surprised, watching it. I mean, I love the idea of an anthology, especially the way they kind of frame it in this one. I thought was really creative, all to kind of serve a story that is the bookend of the movie. But I think it's kind of cool to make it feel, I think that's what some of the things like we see like and I'm only saying this because like it's so consistent, like all the VHS films, like everybody always talks about like the stories and like what the wraparounds are, and if there's a bigger story to it, all those things, some better than others, but like this one was like a really great device in terms of kind of following Craig and thinking that it's just a story where these stories are being shared to just give us 4 or 5 other little stories inside of it. But then when it kind of ties it in, and like you said, John, into the end of the film and with the credits, it really kind of plants those little anthology pieces inside of an actual movie. Like it's not just an anthology film where there's these 5 little stories that are cool. It's really like these dreams that this guy has had. And it's like, I think the dread for me is like the idea of either being stuck in a loop, like it feels like a little bit. Because some of these movies that kind of use that as a device, where the whole thing happened and it was a dream and it starts up just like it started at the beginning of the movie. It could play out like that. You could make a change, with the information that you thought you had, or it could be like my vibe on this was that it is a loop. Or something, there's some kind of really bleak, just like thing that this guy is stuck inside of.
And that we don't know how many times he's been through it based on the way it begins and the way that it ends. Right. Like we could be watching the 50th iteration of this for all we know.
And even like with the themes of the stories that were being told by the guests at the house, like, it kind of, like a macro view of this character, it makes me wonder, maybe this character is not experiencing any of this stuff. Maybe this character is somewhere else, beholden to the themes that were being told in these stories, like themes of, death, of, possibly ghosts, of, greed and envy and like all these things that like are just so like juicy in terms of they could make a movie out of any of them, you know, and they do every week at the theater. But I think the idea of like this guy being told these stories and having some recollection of something with these characters, it almost makes me think of like the movie Identity, you know, like that's what I kept thinking about. And it may be a jump, but I think the idea of like maybe these stories or these characters that he's stuck in this loop with maybe represent pieces of him, you know, or parts of him that have fractured over time and maybe caused this loop. You know, if he is kind of stuck in this, like you said, John, how many times has this happened?
Right.
But yeah, overall, like I thought it was pretty great. I mean, I was really happy watching it. I love, you know, these short stories that are delivered so efficiently and they're so lean. And like there's a beginning, a middle, and an end to each of these little things.
And there's an escalation to the stories.
Yeah,
like we start with a short, simple story, and then we go a little longer, and then we get like a longer comic story, and then we get a longer dark story that was you know, again, it prefigures a lot of stuff that people were dealing with decades later and still are dealing with as a trope of horror. Some of the things they deal with. Like I liked I thought the girl's story was really creepy about like the party in the house and the wing of the house that nobody goes in, and the little boy,
like
that
the
was
hide
like
and seek stuff.
that was really good. I mean, someone could have a total meal of that.
Totally.
That would be the long trailer scene that is like the selling point of some new Blumhouse movie or something like that. The sort of house. So it's like, oh, but the boy's been dead. But I feel like the way I totally agree. The little stories. I think it's an interesting tradition too. You know, like the Brits really love Christmas and they really love all these like wintertime traditions. And it kind of goes back. I mean, I was trying to dig into this today and figure out where this goes back to, but it kind of goes back to just you know, it was a cold, dark time of year and people sit around the fire telling stories. And so there's a little bit of this kind of British tradition of a scary story at Christmas time, ghost stories at Christmas time. And this kind of fireside story, you talked about how kind of cozy that setup is, Steve. And the low ceilings with the beams, and you totally want to sit by that fire and sit with these people. And the way they're telling their stories, you can tell they're doing that thing we all do of like telling ourselves these stories and kind of chuckling at them as a way maybe of chuckling away the darkness. But you're sort of glad to be sitting there together doing it. And the fact that it goes back maybe to a tradition, could be hundreds of years of people sitting around fires telling stories to kind of give each other a little scare, but then also a little comfort. I don't know. I just think that there's such a level of craft to those stories and that storytelling, and you can see it, Ronald, right in the script and the way that the stories turn. That it's just, and you were talking about just how well scripted it is, Steve. All of that is just the craft of they know how to do a little ghost story. If you read a lot of stories from that period, the late 1800s into the early 1900s, there is a format. Frequently, a story will start with like a drawing room full of people having a debate and two gentlemen, and one of them saying, "I can prove to you that there's life after death," and another person says, "No, there's no way you can." And sometimes it doesn't wrap around much, and it's just like that's the format of the story. But other times it does what this movie does, which is, as you said, Steve, make the wraparound like an essential part of the whole story. And the fact that everybody's telling something that kind of happened to them. And I also really like the fact that we get that one comedy story that is sort of like the guy telling a joke, a long joke that everyone goes, "Oh, you had us going there for a while." That could be a real story. But even that had that crazy moment where the guy commits suicide by just walking into the pond.
The pond,
drowning himself. But I don't know. I thought, and that's the other thing too. The humor is in this. There is a lot of that same humor that made the Ealing comedies funny.
Oh man, the like, so I'm all about ghosts and communicating, but the guy pointing to the sky to go to heaven, to go, that's just like he
there's
did
a
it
pass
like 20 times in one sitting. Just cracked me up. Like it was funny because there were different versions of it. There was like a shore version, and then it got less and less shore, and he was doing it in the background, and sometimes he would just be kind of off to the side.
When he had him on the back of the car and you could see that he was still doing it, he's still trying it as he went by. You know, that segment was directed by Charles Crichton, who is the guy that directed A Fish Called Wanda later. And A Fish Called Wanda feels like a required viewing style movie, so who knows? Maybe we'll get to that. But he was a guy who I looked at his career. There's not a lot that I know of Charles Crichton's movies. I thought I would know more of them, but he directed a lot of movies and a lot of television. And actually, each of these segments was directed. There were 4 or 5 directors involved in this movie. And so I don't know. I just think that it made me think. Here's a few rabbit holes I can fall down by finding out what some of these other movies these people made around this time were, especially if they were chosen for this based on, work that might have been similar to this. And I did want to ask you guys a question. There was a little trivia question as I was looking at the credits for this. We need to decide which cast member has the most British name. I'm going to give you three: Mervyn Johns, Basil Radford, or Googie Withers.
Googie. I kind of
Uh,
like Basil too.
I'm going with Basil. I was going with the second one.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess that's 2-1. I think Googie Withers is a remarkable name, but I agree that Basil. If it was Basil Withers, I think it would have had it. But I'm
Or
really
like Basil Dempsey.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's like super British.
But also, let's give these Brits credit for like being just the way they talk about things. I love how the exposition is handled so economically in a movie where the actors are this like studied and the dialogue is written as sharply as this, where it just like he comes in and he says, "Oh, what a pleasure to see you at this time of day. I'm so sorry we had to call you at a late hour last night. Well, I drove through the rain, but I'm here to, whatever." It's like they say what they need to say and it doesn't sound clunky because there's a kind of a music to it. The dialogue really
is
well delivered.
If two people are mad at each other, I mean, it really only rivals like Bone Thugs and Harmony. Like really, like but like if they're like, holy moly, like this is. It's like you've been paying attention to me. I'm gonna come over there and give you something. I'm gonna give you a lesson. And he's like, oh, but it wasn't me. It was a band. I'm like, whoa, what? But you're right. There is like a poetry to it. It's a rhythm to it. It's like a like pentameter. It feels like it's like it's weird. It's like these couplets of dialogue that just feel very like rhythmic. So cool. And it threw me off, man. It really was like one of those movies that just it was fascinating. I loved the way that the buildup happened. And the fact that there were so many murders and attempted murders in this.
Yeah,
but like especially the like doll. So this is a very unhealthy relationship with the doll and the
like the ventriloquist dummy.
Ventriloquist dummy. So you think that he's being tortured, and then the dummy kind of says that very end of their spat, he's like, maybe you need to watch him. Then he just goes like, man, he just like shoots him so many times. I'm like, this is, I thought that it was the other way around. You think it's the doll, but
well, it turns out there's a weird cuck scene where the guy's watching the other ventriloquist with his ventriloquist dummy, and that's when it turns. No, but also I honestly the shot that really creeped me out was there was a low angle shot where he's in his prison cell in his bed, and there's all the people crowded around the prison cell looking in. And the ventriloquist dummy gets up, and it's clearly like a kid in a costume all of a sudden. But it's still the angle and the makeup. It really was a good, creepy, unsettling shot. And it's like, but also, we've seen people try to do that. We saw Magic, actually, a previous required viewing pick. That
I was wondering.
Clearly means I think that they had to know about. I mean, I feel like Magic was made with the full awareness of this.
Right.
But so we stalled until you came back, Steve.
Thanks, man. No, I was gonna say, like, I didn't know if you guys got to it or not, but like some article I was reading about it, it was saying that like at least 2 or 3 of the stories, like, is that what you guys were talking about? Like how it had been made into like longer format, either remade or features or something like that?
Oh no, I had not heard that.
Yeah, something I read, like I was trying to find it when you were talking earlier. It was talking about how let me see if I can find it real quick. It was saying that I think the 2 stories that were the 2 stories that were written by John Baines were reused for later films, and the dummy episode was adapted into the pilot episode of a long-running CBS radio series called Escape.
Wow.
Okay. Cool.
But I don't know what films they were made into. But I think the ones that he wrote, what did he write? I think he wrote the one with the, oh god, which one was it? The Haunted Mirror, and I guess the Ventriloquist. Yeah, he did the Ventriloquist. I guess those two. So I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe
story by John Baines, The Haunted Mirror, and
maybe
story by John Baines, The Haunted Mirror, and
yeah.
Ventriloquist Dummy, story by John Baines. Also, the Golfer's story, which is directed by Charles Crichton. I should have mentioned also that's based on a story called The Story of the Inexperienced Ghost by H.G. Wells. So
Oh,
you know
wow.
who H.G. Wells was. He's the War of the Worlds and
Yeah.
others. You know, so I don't know. I think that it's an interesting thing. But like the part of what makes this work is the quality of the stories themselves, and I feel like they chose a like a well-tuned group of stories to work together, to not be all the same tone, but to feel like they kind of all fit the idea of here's a different person's kind of encounter with the uncanny and how they might talk about it. And I have to say
Yeah.
that story in the mirror story, I thought it was really creepy. Like that idea of
It
the
was.
mirror that saw something bad and now it's kind of haunted. I'm
Yeah.
sure that's been in a lot of things, but when you really think about like the way they played it out and even the way they visualized it, I thought was really, really effective. I did think it was hilarious that, you know, we've talked before about like the librarian who knows all the stories. I thought this was the creepy antiques dealer who knows the entire haunted story of the mirror. I thought that was great that he sold it to her and then is like, oh, by the way, I should probably tell you something about that mirror. Tells her something that would make you not want the mirror. You know. Anyway. So I think that means the next pick is Ronald. Ronald, you're the next in the cycle. So tell us what we'll be watching. What are we required to watch in the next episode? Movie Schmovie.
So one of my favorite albums of all time is GZA, Liquid Swords. And in this album, there's movie audio blended throughout the entire album. It's a very signature thing that Wu-Tang has done.
Yes.
That I've never seen this movie in my life. And every time I hear about it, every time I mention that I haven't seen it, martial arts fans and good storytelling fans alike get equally angry at me. It's two movies combined. The Lone Cub series was blended into one version and brought to America into a movie called Shogun Assassin. People talk about this movie constantly. I've never seen it, but I know several audio clips from it, and it's supposed to be gorgeous. It's supposed to be good storytelling, but Shogun Assassin built in it. So what makes this especially special is it's two films combined, yes, but it is one of those cases where the dubbing had an extraordinary cast to do it, and I don't even think there's a version with subtitles, because this version was so good. Like, I think that people kind of X'd it out. I mean, you can find it if you're hearing impaired or something like that. But in terms of just dubbing, this is the version. Shogun Assassin is the version. So that is my pick. Let's see if we can watch this.
You looking it up?
Yeah, I want to see where it is. I can't. I guess the issue is I know that it's on all services to buy. I'm trying to see if I can find it on a place to stream.
While you're looking that up, I'll add one little factoid to Dead of Night that I didn't mention, is that it's partially shot by Douglas Slocum, who is a cinematographer who, if you look at his resume, you'll go, oh, that guy. But he's the guy who was the cinematographer for the first 3 Indiana Jones movies. So if that gives you an idea of his and The Lion in Winter and a few other things. So yeah, that's another like kind of cool cross section that he was working that long ago, and it might be accounts for why the movie, like the lighting and the camera work, was so effective. I think it's probably they had a real master doing it.
Oh wow! So
Ronald, have you found it?
Yeah, this is oh my goodness, this is really
wow.
Woo! I've never seen this before. It's not in very many places. It looks like one of the only places that is showing up on Just Watch is the Criterion channel. That's the only place where I can find it. Holy moly. I've never been so deadlocked in a movie before.
We'll figure it out. People will watch, or they'll hear us talk about it, and they'll find their ways.
Yeah, there are ways to watch it. There are ways to watch it, but not many. And if you have a friend, this is interesting. I don't know if I've ever run into this before. Like, I cannot find this anywhere but the Criterion channel. I know that they remastered it pretty recently.
That might be the only place you can watch it.
Yeah. Criterion. Oh, that's really cool. So Criterion or a local rental place, because they exist.
Yeah.
Shogun Assassin. I'm so excited to see this. I'm finally ready to sit down and enjoy a Shogun story.
Yeah.
About
Cool.
a kid and his father.
And also it's good, good mix. We certainly haven't watched a Shogun story before.
Yeah, sure, man.
We need to tick that box. Awesome. Well, what is our next subject? I will just throw out there, maybe we should talk a little bit about the legacy of Norman Lear, who died this week, and 101 years old. I mean, he was
crazy. He lived a life.
He was working back, and he had like a life before he had the career that we know him for, but definitely in the late 60s into the early 70s, the guy was on fire as a TV writer and TV creator.
Yeah.
And the first thing I thought of today when people were talking about him was he's one of those rare examples of somebody who's like both extremely edgy and totally mainstream, in the sense of like he hit, I mean, these hugely successful cultural sensations that he had a hand in crafting, or even just bringing to America. Some of the shows that he, is most famous for were shows that he Americanized, did like an American version. Just to look at, though, like, okay, the shows he created between, I don't know what this is, maybe 70 and 75 are All in the Family, Sanford and Son, Maude, Good Times, and The Jeffersons. And the next show he created was a show called Hot L Baltimore, which was a Baltimore-based show that was based on a trashy hotel where the E had fallen off the sign, and so it was Hot L Baltimore is what it was called. But it was like supposed to be like a seedy kind of trashy hotel. I don't know why he chose Baltimore as the location for that. I encourage you guys to seek out you can find the opening theme and a television commercial, like a clip promoting the show. It lasted for maybe half a season or something like that. It was not a well-regarded show, but it was at the time meant to be sort of another of Norman Lear's kind of socially progressive shows, because of the people who were hanging around the hotel. Like, the characters included sex workers and a gay couple, and had probably his usual kind of like racially charged, ethnically charged, whatever humor. I'm curious. I kind of want to seek it out. I bet it's pretty bad, but I also thought it was kind of interesting. He had that string of total pearls in terms of television, and then he gets involved with Baltimore. He gets involved with our city, and he can't make it work. What is it about Baltimore? It brought even Norman Lear down, his first flop.
I think also at the time he had One Day at a Time. I remember,
like that was his next show, so he did bounce back. But if you look at his next several shows, there is like a lot of stuff that you go, oh, okay, that's when you get into Mary Hartman, which I know people know. But then you got The Dumplings, All's Fair, The Nancy Walker Show, All That Glitters, and then Fernwood Tonight, which, if you know what that one is, that is that's a big show, but kind of a cult show. Anyway, a guy who had an amazing career, but especially if you just look at that period between All in the Family and The Jeffersons, like that shit was just always on when I was a kid. I didn't even think about when it must have started or when it must have ended. But, to be started in the early to mid 70s and to last kind of into the 80s, and I think remained relevant for at least a couple, maybe 2 or 3 decades, like The Jeffersons, like that had currency, that idea. I think maybe now it's drifted off a lot of people's radar, but just the idea. Different Strokes was many shows later, but that we're still talking only about 4 or 5 years later. I think that was like 79 or 80. So no, it's crazy. What a crazy career, but especially when you look at what he was able to do when he was able to do it, and the fact that he was putting himself, in the middle of these issues. I don't know. I know I'm a little older than you guys. Did you grow up with these shows on syndication and being played in every house and everywhere you went when you were growing up, like I did?
Yeah.
I mean, go ahead, Ronald.
Yeah. I mean, it had a pretty astronomical effect on my sense of humor. I mean, All in the Family, Jeffersons, a little bit of Maude, Good Times, still, Sanford and Son. I mean, so I like the Gerard Carmichael show, and the fact that he had him on set to help him kind of even shape the show in this kind of Norman Lear style of tackling big subjects every episode, ironing it out, and kind of coming to like a conclusion that maybe you didn't expect from people. And an honesty that's exercised on screen that I only see in Norman Lear stuff, to the stuff the live in front of a studio audience that just, if you guys have never seen it, listeners, man, watch live in front of a studio audience, which is just basically they choose one episode, a big episode from one of his works.
Oh, and they get like the modern actors to do it. Yes. We watched a couple of those.
It's
Those
so
are so
good.
fun. Those are
They're
so fun.
so fun. And watch Gerard Carmichael show to kind of see the echoes of it in there. But
Ronald, I like what you're bringing up though, because it's like how many people have not just revolutionized the genre, but like a medium, the kind of popular form of the 3-camera sitcom that we think of from our youth. A lot of that was him. I mean, a lot of stuff was shot on film before. He was one of the first people to focus. I mean, my understanding, maybe I'm getting some historical details wrong, but I think he was one of the people who like revolutionized that kind of shot on video with multiple cameras, like it was, and which became the format of the sitcom for what we remembered. You know, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to throw that out there.
It's cool. So yeah, I for sure wouldn't have done anything with like stand up or anything if I hadn't seen some of this stuff. Like Red Fox had a huge impact on me. And you know, he was brought to us through Norman Lear. So yeah, I not gonna lie to you, I was really sad. I'm really sad that he passed away. He's 101.
But yeah,
I know. You want him to live forever. You know,
right? Of all the runs, though, like 101 is pretty
that's a peak right there.
That's a run. So, Steve, what about you? What are your?
No, basically what you just said. I mean, I remember growing up, the ones you rattled off earlier, John, like the front end of it for the main part, and then eventually Different Strokes. But yeah, like Good Times and Jefferson's, like Stanford, and like they were always on, you know, syndication. Yeah. Like my grandparents, I remember my grandfather always watching them. I mean, just, you know, and hearing them laugh to those shows, like, is a memory, you know, in my head of like kind of like the kind of people and they were and the kind of comedy they liked, you know. So it's like growing up, just sitting there on the floor and, you know, at my grandparents' house watching those shows with them, and obviously my parents too, but specifically my grandparents, I know, loved a lot of the shows that he had a hand in, and yeah, just watched them all the time there. Yeah, I mean, they're landmark shows, and you know, they're benchmark shows too, like John said. Like, you know, they're like kind of what things are measured against, or at least to say, like, you know, what started the type of shows that we watch now. But yeah, I mean, crazy run. But yeah, what an amazing what a fortunate man, and you know, to for what he was able to stay here, or the amount of time he was able to stay here, and what he was able to put into the world. I mean, it was, thank you. It was great.
Just a quick survey here. Do you have a favorite Norman Lear protagonist or you know, actor in a role in that group of iconic parts?
Oh man, I mean,
I'll just throw out there Sherman Hemsley as George Jefferson. It's almost impossible to make that character what he was in terms of the sort of progressive depiction that show represented, but also to then make him a guy who was an asshole with a chip on his shoulder, not like the same as Archie Bunker, but that type of guy to the people around him, a guy who became a little bit hard to deal with. And then he give him like Florence as a maid that, like, you know, gives him, he talks back to him. I don't know. I just thought all that stuff was a funny dynamic, but so much of that came from that character's sort of bruised ego, and how, you know, we love him, but we also, he was, you know, he wasn't, again, in the wrong the same way that Archie Bunker was, but it was a similar thing to, let's have a protagonist of a show who's constantly learning lessons, you know? And I just think that, like, I don't know, that made me laugh so much. And I look at it now and I realize so often now you go back to some classic show like that and you go, like, when you realize, like, oh wait, Don Knotts was incredible as Barney Fife. That was a great performance. You know, I realized, I think that Sherman Hemsley's performance, you know, there's one other obvious one that might be my contender, but that's the one that jumps to mind.
I'd have to go with Red Fox, I think. Yeah, as Fred Sanford. I mean,
hilarious.
That's the thing. Again, I just said, like, with my grandparents laughing, like it was him. And, you know, like, I have so many, like, I can remember specific episodes of that show because of, like, his performance and the way he, and honestly, like, the bond that he has with Lamont. Like, I just feel like, you know, they're
They're faking the heart attacks.
They're really, yeah. I was gonna just say, like, every time he fakes it, this is the big one. Like, anytime he's in like a moment like that, he can't get himself out of.
Yeah.
Like, he just would fake that and like look up to the sky, like calling his wife. That shit is like that's like stained in my brain.
It's
like
so good.
And I mean, I'll catch episodes of that still now every once in a while, like randomly come across something. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I got to go with Sanford. I mean, just because that's the one that always had my grandparents dying, and I just feel like that just had such an impact on me.
What about you, Ronald?
Yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna throw a wild card out there, man, because when I saw her, it shook up my world. Because I would say Fred G. Sanford, but when I saw Thelma on Good Times, I had never seen somebody like her before.
Okay,
even skin, afro. She was confident and funny, and she used to jab at JJ, and she'd hurt JJ's feelings all the time. What are you talking about, dummy? I mean, what am I doing? What's the name? I'm doing Red Fox.
Hey, I mean,
what's about JJ?
There's no difference between Thelma and Red Fox, but that's great. You're right, Ronald. That's a really good pick. Not a good impression, but a really good pick.
You're very tired, Ronald. I understand.
Man.
I understand.
Listen to the way we talk about these characters. We feel like we know these people. We live with these characters because they're so well drawn and because there's so much of it. These shows ran for a while. There's, the other. I mean, you got to give props to the construction of Archie Bunker.
Yes, Archie
and
Bunker
Carol
was
O'Connor's
so great.
performance. Like, it never occurred to me that he was a guy in his late 40s.
Yeah.
Watching the show, but also just the fact that that's not a real person, that's a performance. It kind of blows your mind. If you hear Carol O'Connor talk and he's like this kind of erudite thespian, it kind of knocks you on your socks. Knocks your socks off, or knocks you on your ass. Knocks your socks on your ass.
We are all at that point, guys.
This will knock your socks off.
If only you had said that as Fred G. Sanford.
I don't think I'm allowed to do that voice.
It'll knock your socks off your ass.
It'll knock your socks off your feet and onto your ass. But no, just that's a great construction too. But no, I think that's a good round of picks. And also, there's an emotional attachment to this stuff, and it is weird when somebody who has been around that long, and to even be an advisor to Jared Carmichael, or Gerard Carmichael, as you said, like, that shows you that even as recently as that, he was being viewed as a valuable voice in the field that he helped pioneer, innovate, whatever we want to call that. I mean, we're not pretending he invented the sitcom, but it is true. If you really look at that clutch of shows, that really was like, I mean, shit, that was such a huge portion of what was syndicated when I was a kid. That and like Alice and Three's Company. Maybe those shows had been phased out, but I don't know.
No, Three's Company, it was huge. It was huge. I mean, we could have a whole hour and a half conversation about that show.
We should do a required viewing, the pilot episode of Three's Company. But yeah, so rest in peace, Norman Lear. But as you said, Ronald, you kind of thought he would live forever because he'd made it to 100. It was like, well, maybe he's an immortal being, and we just are starting to see that.
Right. Damn.
Also, he made that bucket hat just look like the most stylish thing a guy his age could
do. Yeah. It's wild, man.
Okay, so I know Steve and I saw a movie, and then I guess we'll get to bits and bobs with Ronald James. But maybe you're curious about it. I don't know, Ronald.
Come on,
Godzilla Minus One.
I'm so curious. Can I ask you guys a question? Because I've been hearing this a lot.
Yeah.
Did you guys get choked up?
Yes.
I did. I keep hearing this. That's like a very common part of reviews. They're like, I almost cried like crazy watching this movie.
I would say the only thing that kept me from getting choked up is the fact that our protagonist definitely gets choked up for you. Like, there's like 3 or 4 ugly cry scenes with this guy that I think is like, at that moment when a character starts breaking down, it takes a little bit of the pressure off of me. But when a character is not breaking down, I feel a little bit more like I'm likely to be choked up, because that's like the emotion transfers to me. But this movie was actually displaying I mean, honestly, a character who was very emotional and very cowardly and had a lot to sort of atone for, in a sense,
Yeah.
at the center of this movie. So I can see why people are saying this movie packs an emotional punch, but it did not trigger the, I'm somewhat of an easy cry, and this one did not get me. But again, in the thought, there were some scenes where I thought about what just the weight of certain things that were happening in it, and it did, it felt like. I mean, I think the official line on this movie, right, is that this is one of the best, if not the best, attempt they've had at making the human characters feel like they matter in a Godzilla movie. And I don't know enough about the tradition. There's dozens of Godzilla movies. I don't know enough about those movies to know whether that's true, that this is actually the best. But in terms of the ones I've seen in the reboots in the recent years, I could see that being true, that this is one of the best stabs they've had yet at saying, like, you're going to follow human characters and you're not going to be watching them going, why am I watching these human characters? I'm just waiting for Godzilla. In this movie, there was more to chew on than that. Didn't you think so, Steve?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that's the biggest success of the movie, is the fact that you get introduced to characters that you follow for all 3 acts of the movie, that you really are caring about what's happening to the characters. And as new characters are introduced, you get to spend time with new characters that kind of add weight to the situation that our main character is going through and navigating, like this PTSD that he's going through, and a unique situation with people that he's he's living with and having a version of a family with now.
The guys on the boat as well later become like
right. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, everybody that gets introduced is kind of just layering upon. He's layer upon layer of like why I care about the main character, and even the ones around him. I mean, there's some other characters in the movie that you really do care about, but the main character Koichi, like I feel like when you're introduced to him, you kind of get this feeling of there's a lot of exploration of like of the war and the kamikaze pilots in the beginning of the movie, actually through the whole film. And when they even use it as a line of dialogue, basically like, I can't fault you for like not wanting to do this when we've already lost, like some version of that. Like he basically lands on this island to start the film. And that's it gets introduced to Godzilla pretty early in the movie, but he basically is landing his plane, he's grounding his plane voluntarily because I don't want to kill myself because this war is over.
Right.
And
that's heavy already. Like
it's there's so much weight to that. And even the first exchange that the engineer, the mechanic, and our main character has, it's heavy, man. It's really heavy. But then Godzilla walks into the scene. So it's that kind of stuff. And I think
like literally, Ronald, Godzilla walks into this situation.
Yes,
that's so crazy.
But I think that's really what makes it so. It makes it so great, is just because like, the drama itself works really, really well. Like, it's just the thing that's pivoting around everything is Godzilla in this movie. I mean, it is a Godzilla film. Don't get me wrong. I mean, and you see lots of great Godzilla footage and action and attacks and heat rays and all the great shit that you want to see in a Godzilla movie. But what makes this movie such a winner? And yeah, I from the ones I've seen, and I've watched a bunch with my dad, like I actually want to take him back now that I've seen that they're extending the run of the movie through the end of the year.
I'm glad, because what I'd heard was that it was going to be gone in a week or something. And that's
first they said first the extension was to the 14th, and then I just read the day, we're recording this on the 7th, that apparently it's going to maybe go through at least the end of the year, and like it's maintaining IMAX screens too, which is really big. And I actually saw it on IMAX, which was fantastic. But yeah, I can't wait to take him back to see it. I'll just say, yeah, it's definitely one of the best Godzilla movies I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Better than any, I mean, just across the board, just better than any of the like MonsterVerse stuff that we've seen thus far, mainly because of how great the human stuff works. But man, I love this movie. Like, I really genuinely loved it. And there's no doubt it's going to be in my top films of the year. I really am excited for you to see it, Ronald. And if you can see it in IMAX, if it's extending that run, try to go see it in the theater, because the Godzilla shit is amazing. I mean, it looks so good.
You want Godzilla to see it. You want Ronald. I just confused you with Godzilla. I'm sorry. the lighting was different. No, you want Ronald to see this in the theater. However, I also want Ronald to geek out about how this sounds in his home theater, because this has got like a nice repurposing of the traditional Godzilla sounds. Like,
yeah.
and that's, we haven't really talked about the fact that this is essentially, if not a reboot, kind of like a Halloween 2018 of Godzilla, in that this is like one that goes back to the origins. It's set in the 40s. It goes back to the origins of the idea and the character.
Same music, right? Like they supposedly use the same music.
It's got it in the movie, original theme.
But I mean, like I've always heard that Godzilla was this allegory for like post World War II Japan, and I've always seen that, but never fully felt it the way that this movie does it. I'm sure maybe if I went back and watched everything with the knowledge that I could, and I'm actually kind of interested in it. But I do like the way this movie, even the look of the Godzilla, the design, it kind of bridges the gap between what we've seen recently and kind of a man in suit sort of appearance. Like it does a pretty good job of feeling like somehow it's a timeless standalone Godzilla story that doesn't quite cancel out or attach itself or detach itself to or from other Godzilla movies. I mean, I don't know how much of the lore of this movie is different. There's a way that Godzilla, Godzilla is going to persist in some way, and the way that they depict that he's an ongoing force. I don't know if I've seen quite this version of it before, but it kind of reminded me of like Jason Voorhees, the way that, the way they could just pull anything out of their ass to say like, this is why he's making it to another movie. But I don't know. I think that, without that frame of reference and seeing it kind of late and being kind of tired, what really got to me was the characters on the boat I really loved. It reminded me of like Jaws or something. And
very much. Yeah.
The stuff out on the water of these people in these meager circumstances going versus Godzilla, the guys in the big boats with the big guns show up, but it doesn't go great for them. And then our heroes, with what little they have to figure out what to do. And there's a huge redemption shot for this kamikaze guy who we appreciate. I mean, honestly, the more we talked about that, Steve, the more it was hitting me what a tricky, like complicated moral predicament that is, to have a character whose job was to die. Yeah, he shirked his job he was going to do on behalf of his country that just lost a war. And he's now a picture of the failure to even do this job. However, no one can blame you for not wanting to just go fly your plane into something because you're supposed to when there's no more war to fight. So it's like, it's a huge, heavy human debate that centers on this guy, and the way people react to him. Like, he really has to kind of earn people's respect. The second that even people that like him, when they find out what he did, that he kind of abandoned his, his post, so to speak, or voluntarily quit the mission. Like, it's like something that works as both a sort of, I can't really relate to that. That's huge. That's historical. Well, oh my God, I haven't thought about kamikaze pilots this way before. But also, we can all think about that thing, on the more human level of just like something that you carry with you that you don't know that you can ever put right. And so I do think it gives the character a certain kind of poignance that maybe is rare for Godzilla movies, but certainly is rare for this type of heroic character. We've seen a much more like tough guy version of this character before, and this was again, I don't know if it's a cultural thing that maybe it's not as unexpected to have a Japanese protagonist be a little bit more fully rounded and emotional or something, but it felt to me like one of the ways in which this movie definitely is not an overly westernized movie is the way that it digs into the PTSD and the post-war thing, and even just the kamikaze pilot who lived is a pretty interesting
survivor's guilt is like
philosophical conundrum.
It's crazy. But yeah, I don't want to like just go on, especially I don't want to say anything more to ruin anything for Ronald, because I do think he wants to see it. So I just to say, like, you want a great Godzilla movie, you want a blockbuster film, period. Just go see this in a theater right now. Like this
was your audience reactive? Mine was.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Like I went 2:00 or 2:15 to an IMAX showing that was, and the IMAX screens, I mean, the theaters are pretty big, like count wise. So like it wasn't like sold out, but I mean there was a decent amount of people in there for the afternoon. And I mean the movie's been like going up in box office every day. So like that's why they're extending the run, and the word of mouth is really great on it. So I just feel like this is there's no reason, like this is blockbuster filmmaking on a monstrous scale, literally. And it was great. Honestly, man, like it was so entertaining. The visual effects, we mentioned it last week. Like if whatever the budget being $15 million is completely bonkers to me. Like I don't know how you
I've
make a
read that
movie.
number might be deceptive if we compare
I've
it to the
heard the
way the
same. Yeah.
film industry and the way tax credits or whatever might work
Yeah.
in Japan. But either way, it's definitely got a scrappy upstart kind of quality to it. The fact that it's not, a funny thing, it's not part of the franchise. They just released a trailer for the new Godzilla versus Kong movie.
Yeah.
And I thought, I wondered if that's going to cause confusion. And then in the bathroom after the movie, there were like three guys in there that started talking that they thought they didn't know until the end of the movie that they weren't at the one they saw the trailer for, and they were completely bewildered because they were
Get
like,
out of here.
how is this movie gonna be? Yeah,
No
they didn't know
way.
they weren't watching Godzilla. There were three guys that had the same, and I don't think they were together. I think
Holy
That's
moly.
weird.
so I was, I almost stopped to say like, thank you for giving me this informal, urinal survey of people talking about this movie. But it's like, okay, so there might be some confusion on some people's part, but I did think even if there's not confusion, it was an interesting thing that this movie started getting all this great word of mouth, and then they dropped that trailer, which I still think I'm on board for that franchise, but I do agree that like this version of Godzilla, this sort of treatment of it, is just so much more stripped down, and maybe even the nature of the human story they try to tell in this movie, it gives you a more stripped down relationship between humanity and the monster.
That's wild.
Which works surprisingly well. But it's funny to imagine watching this movie and waiting like, when is John Goodman going to show up?
Yeah, where's Kong?
Where's Kong? This is getting long. They haven't even gotten to the trailer yet.
Yeah. I love Shin Godzilla, so like that's
the
Japanese Godzilla movies are just.
If you dig that, man, this is gonna
Ronald,
it's gonna rock you.
Yeah.
Oh,
God. It's gonna rock you, dude.
I'm ready, man.
Honestly, the scene that you asked, like when you asked about like getting like a little choked up or emotional, like there's a scene that scene I think is in the movie, like the scene that got me. I'm sorry, is what I'm trying to say. It's in the finale of the movie, it's just like top scenes of the movie going for the year for me.
Are you talking about the quiet moment?
Yes.
My audience,
goosebumps, then tears.
It got so quiet, and you see the looks on the faces. Yep. If we're talking about the same moment, we must.
Yes, we are. Yes,
it's an all is lost moment.
Yes.
And I heard someone's down. The people were reacting to like there was a couple shocking moments like that in the movie, and this one woman down the aisle from me said, "Oh, that is so sad." The moment we're talking about. I'll admit that moment got me. When people talk about getting choked up, I always assume they're talking about some of the struggle more directly of the main character. But that moment, the way that's involved, that little family of characters, and there's one character who, the kind of wild-haired guy who I just loved him.
The doctor, the
look on his face, the sort of fading hope that you see on his face in that moment. Really, incredible. And I would agree that moment, that's when I came closest to just being like, oh shit, how did this movie get me to this place? I'm sort of sure something terrible is about to happen.
Yeah.
And I actually care, like we said, in a Godzilla movie. Normally you see what looks like hundreds of people getting killed and you don't really care. But in this, I really was like, no, not these guys.
The only other thing I want to mention real quick, and we can move on. You mentioned that trailer for Godzilla X Kong or whatever that new one's called.
Mm-hmm.
One thing, like watching that trailer, which I'm in the bag for sure. Like I'm there.
Yeah, me too.
But watching that trailer and then seeing this movie, the one thing I worry about with those movies, the MonsterVerse movies, and like I kind of feel it a little bit watching the Monarch series of what we've seen so far with the creatures, is that like I worry that they're losing the scale of how big these creatures are.
Yeah.
Because there's a sequence earlier in the movie of -1 where Godzilla's not that big.
Right.
And we see historical nuclear testing at Bikini Atoll, things that makes Godzilla the beast that he becomes, really more so. And like that scale is just completely bonkers, like how large Godzilla is when we see him later in the movie. Mm-hmm. But in the MonsterVerse films, like especially in the trailer for the newer one, when you finally see Godzilla pop up, it kind of just, I don't know, like unless this like under this world that they're in, in that shot, like when they're kind of running together, like they don't look as big as they used to look for some reason to me. Like they look like they're, I don't know, a couple 30 40 feet tall, you know,
Yeah.
not like hundreds of feet in the air.
At the very least, it looks like Godzilla is smaller compared to Kong than he should be. Even though they
Right.
they made it sound like they kept growing. So I don't know. That's probably their excuse, is that they can do whatever they want because they've said that Kong kept growing.
Yeah, I just mean to say, like, seeing this one and specifically the Ginza scene, like when he's attacking the city, like the scale is just insane. Like it is insane. And like and I literally just watched the other trailer that when you guys sent it like earlier that day, and was like, okay, well this Godzilla is this is huge. Like the other one doesn't look like this big anymore. Maybe it's just the shot. I don't know. I hope that scale is still maintained, but. Yeah, Ronald, go see this when you can, man.
I can't wait.
Don't lose it. Don't let it get out of theater again.
Okay.
At least another couple weeks it'll be in theaters. But there's even rumblings that it may possibly go up this weekend and maybe be the #1 movie this weekend.
Wow,
which would be insane.
I could believe it because it went from something I was curious about to something that I felt like I needed to see based on the word of mouth. Like, I mean, that's when I start getting. I'm sure you guys have the same.
Yeah.
Whatever pipeline it is that you get your info through, but you can tell when people are saying like, "Holy shit!" And then like film buffs, people people like Joe Giordano here in town, people that just see a lot of movies that start raving about stuff. And you start going, okay, all my scenester friends have said I need to see this one. And yeah, I definitely think it's one of those. And again, I went at like 10:30 on a school night, and it was crowded. Not crowded, but for one of those screenings, which are usually ghost towns, there were, a couple of rows full of people. So
really cool.
Yeah, I love it when word of mouth brings a movie like this.
Me too.
And obviously here's a thing that we can say is that there's an affection for these franchises when they feel special to people. And I feel like I was in the room with a bunch of people of different ages and different races and creeds and backgrounds. And there was this weird unified, it was almost like a James Bond thing or something where it's like Godzilla brought us together. Do you know what I mean? Like, here's a thing that brings a certain group of people out to the theater. And like, I think there is I don't know, a cinematic tradition that this fits in a really admirable way.
Really cool.
So Ronald, hit us with your bits and bobs.
Tell us something, Ronald.
Really just one show that has been blowing my mind out of my eyes and brain, and that's
Jesus.
Mind out of your eyes and brain.
Yeah.
Wow.
Just
is that where you keep it now?
Coming out of
he separates it evenly between the two.
Blew your mind out of your brain. I like that.
And out of his eyes.
Yes. That's like oozing at it. The eyes pop.
I can't wait. He's gonna be like, I can't wait to hear the show. He's gonna be like, it's Bluey.
The Price is Right. Have you guys seen this?
It is actually Blippy. No, that's not. No, Blue Eye Samurai.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
What the fuck? Like, I humbly just went to it because there was a guy that does like sound stuff. And he does not like Netflix stuff. He's just like, Netflix is trash. The sound is trash.
That's what I was gonna say. It's like you like walked up like, what's up, Netflix? Let me see this show real quick.
Let me see this. Then I'm like, oh my God. So one of the things, this is one of the few shows that I've watched. There's like a big problem with like sound design and sound bars and home theaters where people literally have to crank the sound up and turn on the captions. You do not need that for this show. It is such a beautifully mixed show. It is a beautiful story where a woman is kind of taken in after a series of horrific things that happens. Her mom is kind of kidnapped and maybe assaulted, and I'm gonna kind of getting into that part. And this blue-eyed samurai comes about in Japan. So it's like the equivalent of a white person walking around in Japan, wreaking havoc to kind of seek revenge for the person that grabbed her mom, impregnated her, and abused her. And it is so well done. Nobody knows that she's a woman. She's very androgynous. She keeps it very inconspicuous as well. Like you can't really see her for too long. She keeps glasses on. She has a big hat. She kind of talks to people a very specific way, and she is a monster. She will cut your fingers off your hand if you cross her. And her friend, I don't want to get too into him and what he physically looks like, because that kind of plays way into it. But she has a guy that kind of accompanies him. That's the comic relief, because she really doesn't have a sense of humor at all. At only when she's killing people does she start making jokes. That's it. And apparently is based on a story of a woman. The writer knew of a story in her family where there were a couple biracial situations where there was, someone was half Asian, half white, and she thought about how it would have been to be in Japan and move around in a space where people are very leery of people with blue eyes and anything European. So it's a cool story, well done, well mixed. It sounds incredible. The script is very good. The voice acting is, and it's English. It's all in English. And it has kind of like a cell shaded style. I don't know if it reminds me of Wish. It looks like Wish, but a little brighter, They really make up a point to show landscapes and things like that. But Blue Eye Samurai is blowing my mind as I'm watching it. So,
can't wait to see it.
Yeah, so I think you'll enjoy.
I think
it.
this blue-eyed. I don't want to. I can't decide if this is offensive to people with blue eyes or not. I'll have to watch it and find out. If I should be mad. So I'll just throw out there real quickly that I saw the documentary that I've kind of had on the horizon for a while. Very fun topic, but a good documentary just came out about the infamous Star Wars holiday special, which if you know, you know. And if you don't know, you still might find this an entertaining doc. It's one of those fun, light pop culture docs that's got a lot of talking heads in it. And, I definitely laughed out loud a couple times at just the descriptions of things and how things happened. But also, it's got a really cool assemblage of footage. Different, you don't have like fresh interviews with people associated with Star Wars, but you do have a little bit of Harrison Ford from like press appearances and some Mark Hamill stuff, and a lot of the historical basis of how this Star Wars. If you know about the holiday special, you know that it was, a corny variety show produced for CBS at a moment when Star Wars it wasn't clear how they were going to turn it into a huge franchise yet. After Empire Strikes Back, they kind of had it locked down, and they talk about that in the movie, that between those two movies, the first two, it was like it wasn't really clear that maybe it was like, oh, if you can get the Star Wars characters on Donnie and Marie to like hype the thing, keep it alive in people's minds,
Wow.
We'll do it. And things that you would never have later. And I don't want to spoil some of the funnier things about some of that stuff, but I think that if you are a Star Wars fan who kind of misses the fun of being a Star Wars fan, this movie kind of brought back a little bit of that feeling of, this is a fun topic that reminded me of the years when you would know somebody that had a video cassette of that special, and you would be watching like a fifth generation dub of the thing, with commercials in it and stuff. And that's also part of the appeal now, is that it's so of its time. So yeah, if you know what I mean when I say light and frothy pop culture documentary with lots of talking heads, people like Paul Scheer and Taron Killam, and then people that are actually involved, it's that style. It's like the VH1 style of pop culture commentary. But with a little bit of, again, a little bit maybe of that underlying current of, this is sort of about what the phenomenon of Star Wars meant when it was a fun idea, and maybe before it became this thing to be, obsessive and gatekeepery about. So yeah, Disturbance in the Force is out there now on various streamers. You can rent it or buy it.
Can I mention one more thing that's been in my brain that I'm enjoying?
So, well, you mentioned a bit, but you didn't do a Bob. So
I didn't do a Bob.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
So I've been really into this idea of seeing. So everybody always talks about the way Star Wars was when it first came out, right? Like how amazing it was, how it hit people,
how it felt, yeah,
how it felt. And I've been kind of on this like mission to find a version that was like a definitive, this is what it is. And I look no further than the 4K project that came up in the last, like, I say 6 or 7 years. So somebody took a 35 millimeter print and essentially rendered it into 4K, and did as little artificial work to it as they can, and it is, even to people like, it's been cited, the despecialized and the 4K one has been mentioned by J.J. Abrams. Like, J.J. Abrams uses it as a source to be like, man, he's actually approached Disney and said, hey, why don't you put this out?
Right.
Somebody's making something that looks incredible. And one of the issues about just Star Wars in general is because it has 10 edits, people are talking about different versions sometimes when they're mentioning, hey, I remember when this part happened, and somebody doesn't remember it at all because it didn't exist in some of the edits that they saw.
Mm-hmm.
So this 4K project, this 4K 77, 4K 80, and 4K 83. Am I got, did I get that right? Okay, so those
Sounds
three,
right.
yeah, so they're free. You can find them on the internet. They're huge though. They're like 50 gigs each. And I'm on this kind of, this weekend, my wife's weekend before her birthday. I think we're going to start on them. Look it up. Look up the 4K 77 project. It is hard work that people are doing to make these, and it's beta. There's like versions. There's like software updates every couple of months. You'll get like, oh, this is 1.5, 1.6. But this is supposedly, and even according to some people that saw it back then, the closest version to Star Wars that people were seeing back then. And I think that is incredible that fans are doing this work. Fans are doing this work.
Crazy.
Cool. So, Steve, what have you been seeing? What watching?
Oh my God, what was that? Watching these buckets fall over the desk I'm sitting at. I really haven't been. I've been watching A Murder at the End of the World.
How is that?
I'm really liking a lot. That's from Britt Marling. She did the OA. Well, most people know her from the OA.
Are there cults involved? Because he always has a cult involved.
Not directly a cult.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
not like that. Yeah, you're right though. Yeah, a couple of the movies she's made have had cults in it too.
Yeah.
Which I think is really good. That I'm 4 or 5 episodes into that. That's really good. Caught up on Fargo, which I'm really liking.
Yeah.
I watched May December on Netflix. Natalie Portman.
How is it?
Julianne Moore. It's really good. I mean, it's not really my kind of movie. I'm not really the biggest. I don't know. I don't find myself saying I'm a Todd Haynes fan. I like some of his movies, but I can't say that the performances aren't amazing. I mean, like both Natalie Portman and Julianne Moore are great, but what's his name? Charles Melton, who is Julianne Moore's husband in the movie. I think he's probably the standout to me, to be honest with you, against two juggernauts like that. So, or at least the surprise, like he's just like incredible in it. And I feel like he's been winning a lot of the Critics Circles awards. So he's going to be, I think, a big Oscar contender, might be giving Robert Downey Jr. a run for his money. But yeah, I don't know. I thought May December was really good. Didn't love it, but definitely see why it's getting all the awards attention and, critical love. It's on Netflix now. But yeah, I think that's all, man. The last week, my goal was to see the Godzilla film, but just been trying to catch up on a bunch of shows I'm behind on. Like, again, I caught up on Fargo, and started, and I think I'm up to date on the Murder at the End of the World. I definitely would recommend checking that out. It's really good. It's kind of like a mystery techno thriller kind of thing.
Oh wow.
And awesome. Yeah, I mean, like Clive Owen's in it. I didn't even realize he was in the show.
He's rarely in stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, he's awesome. But
okay, cool.
Harris Dickerson's in it. He's also in the Iron Claw movie that's coming out in a couple weeks, which I think we're going to be seeing next week as a pod.
Yeah,
and reviewing on next week's show. So it'd be cool to see him in that. So yeah, no, that's pretty much everything I've watched over the past couple of days. But yeah, I think that'll wrap it up. You guys good?
That's good. Yeah.
Moviesmovie.com is the website. YouTube.com/movie podcast if you want to do the video element. But as a reminder, the required viewing, Ronald's pick for next week is Shogun Assassin, and it's a reason to check out the Criterion channel, I guess, which I'll do probably for the first time. I've heard amazing things about it, so I'm happy to venture there. But watch that with us, and we'll talk about that next week. And like I said, we're aiming to go see a press screening of the Iron Claw, which is the Von Erich family story, the rest of the professional wrestlers, Zac Efron, Harris Dickinson, Jeremy Allen White, among some others. But I've heard great things about it. Can't wait to see that. So I'm excited to talk about that next week.
Yeah.
If you guys are good, I'm good. And as always, you've made our day. Thanks.
Bye.